I want you to just, for a second, picture the ultimate American success story. Let's say it's 1994, you're in Indianapolis,
Okay.
and you walk into this store. It's called Save-A-Lot. It's a thrift store, but I don't want you to picture, some dusty, disorganized basement. This is a chain. It's clean. It's bustling. It's really profitable.
Right. It's a legitimate business empire in its own way.
Exactly. And the guy running this whole empire is Herbert Baumeister. He's a bit eccentric. People said he wore suits that were maybe a little too loud, but he's the CEO. He's the guy.
He's the man in charge.
And he's got it all. The beautiful wife, 3 kids, and he lives on this massive, sprawling estate in Westfield called Fox Hollow Farm. And when I say sprawling, I mean it. We're talking 18 acres. It's got an indoor pool, a Tudor-style mansion, dense, private woods.
It is the checklist, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, it is literally everything you're supposed to aspire to. You've got the stability, the wealth, the privacy, respectability.
Total respectability. And if you looked at Herbert Baumeister in 1994, that is exactly what you saw. But today, we aren't looking at that success story. We're going to dig into the cracks in that foundation because beneath that thrift store empire and that perfect family estate was a reality so dark and so violently chaotic that even now, and I mean literally as we speak, in the mid-2020s, forensic scientists are still sifting through the dirt at Fox Hollow Farm trying to figure out exactly how many people died there.
And that is not hyperbole. I really want to stress that for you. We are looking at a case where the recovery of human remains isn't measured in bodies or even skeletons. It's measured in fragments.
10,000 bone fragments.
Over 10,000. It's a staggering number.
That number just stops me cold every single time I read the notes for this deep dive.
No.
10,000.
It's almost impossible to comprehend, and it completely changes the mission of this discussion. We're not just here to recount a crime spree that's been done. We have to unpack the mechanics of a double life that lasted for over a decade. How does a man diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder, I mean, these are labels that usually derail life before it even starts. How does he manage to build a fortune, raise a family, and hunt human beings in plain sight?
And we have the full stack of sources today to help us try and answer that. We've got the court records, we have the police investigation, timelines from that whole I-70 Strangler era, the forensic reports from the excavation at the farm, and crucially, the first-hand accounts of the one man who managed to get away.
So let's get into it, the making of this normal monster.
Usually when we do these profiles, we look for that crack in the armor during childhood. The narrative, the troubled youth where the system fails some kid from a broken home.
Right, the classic criminological starting point.
But with Herb Baumeister, it wasn't a crack. It was like a complete shatter. And it happened in a home that, at least on paper, should have been perfect.
It really was a paradox from day one. I mean, demographically, he had every single advantage. He was born in 1947 in Indianapolis. His father, Herbert Eugene Baumeister Sr., was a prominent anesthesiologist. So this was an upper-middle-class, highly educated household.
So no poverty, no apparent external trauma that we see in so many other cases.
None that's documented. It was, by all accounts, a stable, wealthy home.
Which makes the behavior he exhibited as a child feel even more, I don't know, biological, or at least more innate. It's not a reaction to something terrible happening to him.
It seems to have come from within. We have reports of him playing with dead animals, which is, the classic Crim 101 red flag.
The McDonald triad, right?
Exactly. End of recess bed, wedding fire starting, and cruelty to animals. It's the predictive triad for sociopathy that criminologists have used for decades. Herb definitely checked the animal cruelty box. But there was something else in the clinical notes from his youth that is, well, it's much more specific and, frankly, a lot more disturbing than just acting out.
You're talking about the urophilia.
I am. An obsession with urine.
Mm-hmm.
And we are not talking about a childish curiosity here or, a simple prank. This was a documented compulsion.
He would, urinate on things at school?
On teachers' desks, yes.
Yeah.
Friends from his youth later came forward and reported him wondering aloud about the taste of human urine.
See, that's where we move from a behavioral problem like acting out to something deeply pathological. That is a fetishization of waste, of humiliation. And his father, the doctor, he didn't just brush this off. That's the part that really surprises me.
It is surprising.
Usually in these wealthy families in the 50s and 60s, the instinct is to hide it, protect the family name at all costs.
You're absolutely right. The typical reaction is to sweep it under the rug. But you have to give some credit where it's due. In the 1960s, mental health care was often heavily stigmatized. But Dr. Baumeister saw this behavior in his son and realized it was not just boys being boys.
So he took action.
He did. He had Herb submitted for multiple mental examinations in his teens.
And the diagnosis they got back wasn't, mild anxiety or ADHD. It was heavy.
Far from it. This was the bombshell. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder.
Okay, let's just pause and really unpack that combination for a minute, because those are two heavy hitters that don't always go together.
They're distinct, but they are devastating when they're combined. Antisocial personality disorder, what most of us used to call sociopathy, is characterized by a pervasive disregard for the rights of others. There's no empathy, there's no remorse. It's a total willingness to manipulate and exploit for personal gain. That's the engine of the predator.
Okay, so that's the I don't care who I hurt part?
Exactly. And you layer paranoid schizophrenia on top of that. That introduces delusions, a potential break from reality, disorganized thinking, paranoia.
So you have a person who fundamentally doesn't care about hurting people. That's the ASPD. And that's combined with a brain that might be feeding him a twisted version of reality where hurting people is somehow necessary or justified. That's the schizophrenia.
Is an incredibly volatile cocktail.
And this is the part of the story that is just, it's a tragedy. Because the system actually worked at first. It identified him. It put a label on the problem.
It did. But then just nothing happened.
What do you mean nothing happened? How do you get a diagnosis like that and just walk away?
The records we have indicate he received no significant long-term follow-up psychiatric treatment, no institutionalization that stuck, no heavy medication regimen that was monitored by the state. He was a wealthy doctor's son, so he was effectively diagnosed and then sent back out into the world to, quote, figure it out.
That is absolutely terrifying. It's like spotting a massive structural failure in a bridge, writing a very detailed report about it, and then just opening the bridge to rush hour traffic any day.
A perfect analogy. So he goes to college, or he tries to.
He tries. He enrolled at Indiana University in 1965, but he dropped out. Then later he tried Butler University in 72. Academically, he was flailing. He couldn't seem to focus.
But, and this is so key to his later success, he had this relentless manic energy. People who worked with him called it a strong work ethic.
Which is so often a mask for mania, right? Or hypomania.
Precisely. He drifted through a bunch of jobs. He worked in media for a bit, then for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. But he was always moving, always scheming. And eventually, he figured out how to channel that manic energy into entrepreneurship.
And this is where Save-A-Lot comes from.
This is it. He founded the Save-A-Lot thrift store chain in 1988. And suddenly, the weird guy with the strange behavior becomes the eccentric rich guy. Money has a way of washing away a lot of social sins.
Oh, it buys a whole lot of cover. But while he's building this business, he's also building a family. And this part of the research, honestly, it just baffles me every time I read it. He marries Juliana Sater Julie in 1971.
And they stay married for over 25 years.
But the details of that marriage are just bizarre.
Bizarre is a profound understatement. This is what I call the marriage paradox.
Yeah.
On the surface, they are the successful couple. Behind closed doors, they were practically strangers just living in the same house.
Julie later revealed that in a quarter-century of marriage, they were sexually intimate a grand total of 6 times.
6. Not 6 times a year. 6 times total.
Total in over 25 years.
And she also stated she never once saw her husband fully nude.
How does that even work? I mean, I'm serious. You are living with someone, you're raising 3 children with them. How do you maintain that level of just physical and emotional distance without the whole thing imploding? Was it just a marriage of convenience?
It's hard to say for sure without being inside their heads, but it speaks to the incredible power of denial and probably a significant amount of gaslighting on Herb's part. He likely framed his complete lack of intimacy as, I'm stressed from work, or just chalked it up to his quirkiness.
And the money probably helped smooth over a lot of questions.
Of course. Plus, remember the era. Divorce was messier, more stigmatized. They had a business to run together, and Herb was clearly a master of compartmentalizing his life. But there were cracks, huge cracks. Just 6 months into the marriage, Herb's father committed him again.
Wait, 6 months in, so the honeymoon phase is barely even over, and he's being committed to a psychiatric hospital.
Yes, for 2 months. And the reason given to Julie at the time was that he was hurting and needed help.
So the wife knew. She had to know he was deeply unstable. You don't send your new husband away for 2 months because he has the flu.
She knew something was fundamentally wrong, yes.
Yeah.
But again, once he came out, the machine of their life just kept rolling forward. The business grew, the money poured in, and the darkness was an inside Herb.
Mm-hmm.
It needed an outlet.
And since he was willing it at home and he wasn't treating it with any kind of therapy or medication?
It spilled out onto the highway.
This brings us to the I-70 Strangler era. We really need to set the scene here for you. It's the 1980s, Indianapolis.
This is such a critical period. From about June 1980 to October 1991. This is pre-Fox Hollow Farm. This is when his hunting ground was the interstate.
Uh-huh.
During this decade, police start seeing this terrifying pattern emerge. Young boys and adult men are disappearing. Many of them are last seen around the gay bar scene in Indianapolis, places like the 21st Amendment or a music venue called the Vogue.
And the bodies. They aren't being found in the city. They're not found in alleyways or dumpsters in Indy, which is what you might expect.
No. This is where the I-70 moniker comes from. The killer was using the interstate as a disposal system. He was driving the bodies far away from where he picked them up.
So the victims would be found how?
They were found strangled, usually nude or semi-nude, and they were just dumped in rural streams or shallow ditches right along Interstate 70, stretching from central Indiana all the way into Ohio.
That's a specific forensic countermeasure, isn't it? Dumping bodies, especially crossing state lines.
Oh, it is smart. It's evil, but it's smart. By dumping bodies in, say, Preble County, Ohio, or different jurisdictions across Indiana, he completely fragmented the investigation.
I see.
You've got the Indianapolis PD handling the missing persons reports, but then you have a sheriff's deputy, 2 counties, overhandling the homicide of a John Doe. And in the days before digitized shared databases, remember this is the 80s, there's no internet, no national DNA database, these different agencies were just not talking to each other efficiently.
He was exploiting the seams in the system.
Perfectly.
Let's talk about the victims, because for a very long time, these were just a string of tragic, unsolved cases. But when you look back now, the cruelty and the pattern are so distinct.
Take the very first one linked to the series. Michael Sean Petrie.
Yeah.
June 1980. He was only 15 years old. Found naked, strangled. The autopsy showed no drugs or alcohol in his system.
Which suggests what?
That lack of intoxication suggests he was either overpowered by force or coerced through fear. He wasn't out partying and let his guard down. He was taken. Or he was lured under some other false pretense that didn't involve a party scene.
He was targeted.
He was targeted. And then you look at Delvoyd Lee Baker in 1982. He was 14. This case is one of those what-if moments in the investigation that is just, it's heartbreaking.
This is the witness sighting, right? The one that must keep investigators up at night.
Yes. Witnesses actually saw Baker getting into a vehicle with its killer. They described it as a blue van, and the driver, a white male with a bushy mustache.
If you look at any photograph of Herb Baumeister from the 1980s, that mustache is practically his logo. I mean, it is huge. It's undeniable.
It was his signature look. And guess what he drove during that period? A blue van. The pieces were all there. Baker had been seen near the gay cruising spots in downtown Indy, which fits the predator's hunting ground perfectly. But despite that incredible description, the van, the mustached Baumeister, wasn't caught. The connection just wasn't made.
The lead just went cold.
It went cold. And then there was Michael Andrew Riley in 1983. He was last seen at the Vogue Theater. A witness later, and this is years later, unfortunately, positively identified a photo of Baumeister as the man Riley left with that night.
Wow.
And the geography just keeps expanding, too. It wasn't just Indiana anymore. The bodies started appearing in Ohio, Preble County, Eaton, Ohio. Victims like Eric Allen Rooker, Michael Allen Glenn, Stephen Lynn Elliott, Clay Russell Boatman, Thomas Ray Clevenger Jr.
So he's driving hours to dump these bodies. That's a significant time investment and a huge risk.
It shows the depth of the compulsion. He was living this unbelievable double life where he'd work at the thrift store, go home and play the dad, and then spend his nights driving hundreds of miles with a corpse in his trunk or his van.
Is it?
Of a level of adrenaline addiction and cold, calculated risk-taking that is hard to comprehend.
It is. But then, in 1991, the pattern just stops. The bodies stop appearing along I-70. The whole series just breaks.
And in criminology, when a pattern like that breaks, you usually assume one of two things. The guy got arrested for something else, or he died.
But that's not what happened here.
Not at all. He didn't stop killing. He just changed his real estate situation. In May of 1988, Baumeister bought Fox Hollow Farm.
So he buys this 18-acre estate in Westfield. It's secluded. It's got dense woods. He no longer needs to drive all the way to Ohio to dump a body.
Exactly.
He can just bring them home.
Precisely. The farm gave him total, absolute control. He didn't have to worry about a passing motorist or a state trooper seeing him drag a body into a ditch at 3 in the morning. He had a private graveyard right in his own backyard.
And this transition from a traveling killer to a territorial killer is just terrifying because it implies a total loss of fear.
Yeah.
He felt completely untouchable.
He felt like a king in his castle. And that incredible arrogance led to one of the most disturbing and surreal anecdotes I have ever encountered in all of true crime. It's 1994. The family is living at the farm.
This is the story with his son, right?
Yes. Herb's teenage son is out playing in the woods behind the house, just, digging around, exploring like kids do. And he finds something. He unearths a complete, partially buried human skeleton.
Imagine that moment. You're a kid, you're in your own backyard, a place that's supposed to be safe, and you pull a human skull out of the dirt.
So he runs to his dad. Dad, I found a skeleton. Now, any normal human being, any parent on the planet calls 911 immediately. Herb Baumeister, he doesn't even blink.
What is the lie he spins? Because it has to be a masterpiece of a lie to actually work in that situation.
It's so audacious. It's almost brilliant. He tells his son and his wife, that's just one of my father's old dissecting skeletons from his medical practice. I buried it out there to get rid of it.
Wait. I buried a medical skeleton in the woods to get rid of it? That doesn't even make any logical sense. If it's a medical specimen, you put it in the trash. You donate it to a medical school. Why would you bury it shallowly in your yard?
It is completely illogical.
Yeah.
But it relies on the power and authority of the doctor-father excuse. By invoking his father's respected profession, he completely shuts down the inquiry. It becomes, it's medical stuff you wouldn't understand.
And the family believed him.
They bought it. But here's the truly sinister part that proves his guilt. He didn't call the police to come and collect this medical specimen. He dug the rest of it up himself, stored it in the family garage for a while, and then he reburied it somewhere else on the property.
That is the definition of audacity. He is literally handling the remains of a murder victim right in front of his family, and he's gaslighting them into thinking it's a plastic model or some antique medical tool. It shows how confident he was in his absolute control over them.
It's a masterclass in manipulation and control. He exploited their trust and his father's professional background to explain away the completely indefensible. And because they bought his lie, the killing was allowed to continue for another 2 years.
I have to push back on this a little bit. Does Julie, his wife, really just accept it? Or is it more likely that she looks at her wealthy lifestyle, her huge house, her 3 children, and she decides that a plastic skeleton explanation is a much better reality to live in than a dead body?
I think that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Denial is an incredibly powerful survival mechanism. If she acknowledges that it's a real body, her entire life, her children's lives, everything detonates that moment. So consciously or subconsciously, she accepts the lie. She has to.
But the clock was ticking, because by the early 90s, the police in Indianapolis were finally starting to put the pieces together. They started to realize that a lot of gay men, all of a similar height, weight, and age, were just vanishing. And then a hero emerges, a man named Tony Harris.
Tony Harris is absolutely the key to breaking this entire case. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't law enforcement. He was a potential victim who survived.
Walk us through what happened to Tony, because this is the moment the whole facade finally starts to crack.
So Tony meets a guy at a gay bar in Indianapolis called the 501 Club. This guy introduces himself as Brian Smart.
Brian Smart, okay. Not exactly a master of disguise with the naming convention there.
No, it's simple. It's forgettable. Brian Smart invites Tony back to his place, which he describes as this huge mansion with an indoor pool. This is Fox Hollow Farm. While they are there, things get weird, and then they get dangerous. Brian suggests they try erotic asphyxiation. He wants to choke Tony. But not with a scarf or a belt, with a pool hose.
A pool hose. That is terrifyingly specific and brutal. It implies he's done this before. It implies he had a routine, a kit.
It absolutely does. And Tony Harris realizes this isn't a game anymore. He feels the pressure from the hose. He realizes his life is in actual danger. He manages to survive the encounter. Reports vary on whether he played it cool or fought back enough to break the mood. But the important thing is he gets out of there alive.
Wow.
But he's deeply suspicious. He knows something is seriously wrong with this Brian Smart character in his creepy mansion.
But he doesn't know who Brian Smart actually is. All he has is a fake name and a memory of a house out in the woods.
Right. And for a while, Brian Smart just disappears. But Tony Harris is vigilant. He's on the lookout. Then, in August of 1995, miraculously, he spots Brian Smart again out in public.
This is the moment. This is where the whole house of cards starts to fall.
Tony doesn't confront him. He does something much smarter. He follows him. He trails his car. And this is the crucial detail that breaks the case. He gets the license plate number. He takes that plate number straight to the police.
And when they run the plates, it doesn't come back to any Brian Smart. It comes back to Herbert Baumeister.
The wealthy thrift store owner, the respected family man. And now the police finally have a name. They have a prime suspect.
So they go to him, right? They confront him at the house.
They do. They show up at Fox Hollow. They inform him he's a suspect in the disappearances of multiple men. They ask for his permission to search the house and the grounds.
And he refuses.
Of course he refuses. But here's the problem with the law. You need a warrant or you need consent. Herb refuses. And initially, his wife Julie refuses too.
Why did Julie refuse? At this point, was she still protecting him? Or was she just protecting the house, the family, from the intrusion?
It's complex. I think it's likely a mix of deep denial, genuine fear, and just trying to protect the sanctity of her home and her children from what she probably saw as a police intrusion. But the pressure starts to mount. The police keep pushing, and Herb's behavior starts to completely spiral out of control. He's becoming erratic. The mask is slipping off for good.
And by June 1996, Julie has had enough. She's frightened of him. The marriage is totally crumbling. She files for divorce. And then crucially, while Herb is away on vacation, she finally gives the police what they've been waiting for.
She consents to a search.
This is the turning point. June 24th, 1996. Investigators descend on Fox Hollow Farm. And you have to remember, they are going in there looking for evidence of maybe one or two people. Based on Tony Harris's story, they think maybe, if they're lucky, they'll find a body.
They were not prepared for what they actually found.
Not at all.
They started digging in the woods, in the very spot where Herb's son had found the so-called medical skeleton 2 years earlier. And they just kept finding bone fragments and more fragments, ribs, vertebrae, pieces of skulls.
And the condition was horrible.
They were burned. They were crushed into small pieces. This wasn't just a grave. It was a disposal site, a human processing site. They eventually recovered remains belonging to at least 11 different people just in that initial search.
Meanwhile, Herb is on vacation. He knows the gig is up, doesn't he?
Oh, he knows. He flees. He doesn't come back to Indiana. He flees to Canada. He crosses the border into Ontario and drives to a place called Pinery Provincial Park, right on the shores of Lake Huron.
And this is how it ends. Not with a trial, not with a confession in a quiet interrogation room.
No. On July 3rd, 1996, finding himself completely cornered by the reality of what the police were digging up in his backyard, Herb Baumeister sat down on the shores of Lake Huron. The reports say he ate a peanut butter sandwich, and then he shot himself in the head with a .357 Magnum.
He left a suicide note, though, and the note is, well, it tells you everything you need to know about his personality right to the very end.
It is the final act of a complete narcissist. He wrote it on a piece of yellow notepaper. In it, he apologized for messing up the park with his suicide. He expressed regret about his failing business and his broken marriage. But he admitted to nothing.
Nothing about the murder.
Not a word. No mention of the victims. No remorse for the lives he took. His final thoughts were basically, sorry about the mess and sorry my business failed.
There was also that strange detail where he mentioned he intended to kill himself in a different spot in the park, but he saw children playing there and changed his mind.
Yes. A very strange final attempt to appear human or moral, maybe. Or maybe he just didn't want to be interrupted. It's impossible to say for sure. But what is certain is that he died taking the secrets of the exact number of his victims with him to the grave.
But the story doesn't end in 1996, and this is really why we are doing this deep dive today, because the science has had to catch up to Herb Baumeister's profound cruelty. We need to talk about the victims of Fox Hollow.
Absolutely. The victims are the focus now. For decades, many of those thousands of bone fragments were unidentified. They were John Does in an evidence box. But the revolution in forensic genetic genealogy has changed everything.
Let's name the ones we know, the ones whose families finally got an answer.
We have Johnny Bear, Jeff Jones, Richard Douglas Hamilton Jr. All of them went missing in 1993 and were identified fairly early on through dental records or other traditional means. But then you have the recent identifications, which are just incredible victories for forensic science.
Alan Lee Livingston. He went missing in August of 1993.
Right. And his remains weren't identified until October of 2023. Can you imagine that family waiting 30 years for an answer?
And Manuel Resendez, also missing in 93. His remains were identified in January of 2024.
And even more recently, Daniel Thomas Halloran. His remains were identified in 2025. This is absolutely cutting-edge work. They are pulling usable DNA from tiny bone fragments that were burned and then buried in the ground for decades.
Can you explain for us why that is so incredibly hard? I mean, we see DNA evidence solving a case in 48 hours on TV shows. Why did it take until 2025 for Daniel Halloran's family to get an answer?
It's because of the condition of the remains. Baumeister burned these bodies. When bone is burned at high temperatures, a process called calcination, the heat literally destroys the organic material within the bone. It destroys the collagen, which is where the DNA lives. For a very long time, standard forensic DNA testing just couldn't get a read on burned bone. It would just come back as no result.
So for more than 20 years, those bones just sat in storage in an evidence locker because the science just wasn't there yet.
Exactly. But now labs like Othram in Texas are able to use new techniques to extract usable DNA from minute amounts of this degraded calcined bone. They can build a DNA profile, upload it to genealogical databases like GED Match or Family Tree DNA, and then look for distant cousins of the victim. That's how we're finally getting these names back.
There's also the case of Jerry Williams Comer. He's technically considered an additional victim, is that right?
Yes, he's strongly linked. He went missing in 1995. His remains were never found at the farm, but his car was found abandoned at a mall, and he fit the victim profile perfectly. Authorities have posthumously linked his disappearance directly to Baumeister.
The scale of the forensic challenge at Fox Hollow is something I just don't think people can fully grasp.
Right.
We're not talking about digging up full skeletons.
No. As we mentioned, in December of 2022, they did another search of the property and found even more bone fragments. The coroner in Hamilton County, Jeff Jellison, is currently dealing with roughly 10,000 separate fragments. It's like a macabre jigsaw puzzle, where half the pieces are missing and the other half are burnt.
And they made a public appeal, didn't they? They asked for DNA from the public.
They did. It's an ongoing effort. They've asked anyone who had male relatives who went missing from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s in the Indianapolis area to please come forward and submit a DNA sample, because that is the only way they're going to be able to match these tiny fragments to a name.
It's just heartbreaking work, but it's so necessary. You know, this case has entered pop culture in a really weird way. There are all these ghost hunting shows, Ghost Adventures, Paranormal Witness that go to Fox Hollow Farm because of the whole haunting aspect.
It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, the sensationalism keeps the story alive in the public consciousness, which is good. But on the other hand, it really risks trivializing the very real, very horrific crimes that happen there.
I agree.
It shifts the focus away from the victims, from Alan, from Manuel, from Daniel, and puts it on spooky noises and EMF meters. We have to remember that this isn't a ghost story. It's a crime scene, a very active crime scene.
I agree completely. It has to be about the people who were lost and the families still waiting for answers.
And it's about the failure of the system that allowed a man like Herb Baumeister to operate for so long.
So let's try to wrap this up. We've unpacked the life of a man who was just a walking contradiction. A successful CEO and a prolific serial predator, a father who played with his kids in the yard, and a monster who buried bodies in that same dirt.
It is the ultimate terrifying thought, the banality of evil. Baumeister wasn't some ghoul lurking in the shadows 24/7. He was at the board meeting. He's at the dinner table. He was the guy you bought your vintage coat from at Save-A-Lot.
The fragility of that normal facade is what really stays with me. The fact that he could keep it up for so long, so successfully.
He did. And he was definitely aided by the fact that he targeted marginalized community gay men, sometimes sex workers, people who society in the 80s and 90s sadly didn't prioritize looking for when they went missing. He knew who he was hunting, and he knew how to hide behind his wealth and privilege.
I want to leave you with one final thought. I want you to think back to that skeleton in the garden. The medical skeleton excuse. It sounds completely ridiculous to us now, hearing it with the benefit of hindsight, but it worked. It worked because the people around him wanted it to be true. They wanted to believe the lie because the truth was simply too horrifying to contemplate.
And it raises that uncomfortable question, doesn't it? What anomalies in our own lives do we overlook? What excuses do we accept from the people we love or work with because we just can't bear to see what might actually be there right under the surface?
And with thousands of bone fragments still being analyzed and new names like Daniel Halloran surfacing as late as 2025, how many more families are still out there right now waiting for a knock on the door, waiting for forensic science to finally reclaim a name from the soil of Fox Hollow Farm?
The ground at Fox Hollow hasn't finished telling its story yet.
That's it for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are dissecting the mind of a man who, who really treated the American dream as a mask for a complete nightmare. We are talking about Herb Baumeister, the founder of the successful Save-A-Lot thrift empire, a father, and the owner of the sprawling Fox Hollow Farm estate in Westfield, Indiana. To his neighbors, he was, an eccentric businessman who didn't cut his grass often enough. To history, he is the monster who buried at least 11 men in the woods behind his family home.
And when we say buried, that's risking a massive understatement. I mean, Fox Hollow wasn't a cemetery, it was a disposal site that required an archaeological recovery. Investigators found over 10,000 crushed and burned human bone fragments scattered across that 18-acre property. We are seeing identifications still rolling in as recently as 2024 and 2025. It's a scale of carnage that just defies easy comprehension, and frankly, it puts Baumeister in a category all his own.
It's a tragedy of absolute devastation. But the central question we are debating today isn't about the guilt of the Fox Hollow killer. That is, I think, a settled fact. The debate is about the scope of the predator. Is Herb Baumeister solely responsible for the Fox Hollow horrors of the mid-1990s, or does the evidence point him also being the I-70 Strangler, the phantom who left a trail of strangled men along the interstates of Indiana and Ohio throughout the 1980s? I'm going to argue that we're looking at one man, one compulsion, and a lethal evolution of method.
And I have to push back hard on that evolution theory right out of the gate. It's a seductive narrative because it wraps up a decade of cold cases with a neat bow. But when you look at the forensic psychology, specifically the difference between dumping a body in a public ditch to be found days later versus hoarding remains in your backyard for years, you see two fundamentally different profiles. I believe conflating the I-70 Strangler with the Fox Hollow killer risks rewriting history to fit a convenient villain, and maybe, just maybe, letting the real I-70 killer off the hook.
I understand the hesitation. I do. But let's look at the timeline. It is the strongest piece of this puzzle. The I-70 killings, which terrorized the gay community in Indianapolis, ran from roughly, say, June 1980 to October 1991. Then, silence. Absolute silence on the interstate. Now look at Herb Baumeister. He buys Fox Hollow Farm in May of 1988. By the early 90s, the family is settled, the woods are secluded, and suddenly, the Fox Hollow disappearances begin in earnest. The end of the public dumpings correlates perfectly with the establishment of the private graveyard. The killer didn't vanish, he just went indoors.
Perfectly is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. You mentioned the I-70 murder stopped in October 1991, but Baumeister bought the farm in May 1988. That is a 3-year overlap. So if the farm was this master plan for privacy, why did victims like Stephen Lynn Elliott in 1989 or Clay Russell Boatman in 1990 end up in ditches in Ohio? I mean, Baumeister had the farm, he had the privacy, yet the I-70 killer was still driving 2 hours to dump bodies in public view. That isn't an evolution, that's a contradiction. If the goal was concealment, he had the means to conceal them starting in '88.
Not if you view behavior as a progression rather than a light switch. You don't move into a new house with your wife and 3 kids and start burying bodies in the yard the next day. It takes time to test the boundaries, to feel secure. Those 3 years were the transition period where he was perhaps testing the waters or simply hadn't built up the nerve to bring the violence home yet. And look at the source of the victims. This is the key. The I-70 Strangler hunted in a very specific ecosystem. The gay bars of Indianapolis, specifically within a 4-block radius. Victims like Michael Sean Petrie and Delvoid Lee Baker were pulled from that scene.
The hunting ground was the same, yes. I don't dispute that the victims came from the same community.
Exactly. And 10 years later, Baumeister is prowling the exact same bars. The 501 Club, the Varsity Lounge, picking up men like John Lee Baer and Manuel Resendez. The demographic is identical, the pickup location is identical, the method of initial contact is identical. You have 2 killing sprees targeting the same marginalized group from the same street corners in the same city. I mean, the statistical probability of 2 separate prolific serial killers operating in that same tight district, targeting the same men, and handing off the baton perfectly in 1991, that just defies logic.
It might defy narrative logic, but it doesn't defy criminal psychology. Let's talk about the disposal, because you're treating it like a logistical detail, but it's actually a psychological signature. The I-70 killer wanted his work to be seen. Bodies were found nude or semi-nude, often near roadways or railroad tracks. Michael Andrew Riley, found in '83, was left in a creek. This is discard psychology. It says, I am done with this object and I don't care who finds it. It's an act of exhibitionism, or at least total indifference to the discovery.
Or an act of necessity.
Compare that to Fox Hollow. That was concealment. That was hoarding. Baumeister didn't just kill these men. He kept them. He burned them, crushed the bones, buried them, dug them up, and reburied them. He was living on top of them. That speaks to a desire for possession, a need to keep the secret close. The I-70 killer was an extrovert in his crime. Baumeister was an introvert. Those are two opposing psychological rewards. You don't just wake up one day and switch from an exhibitionist to a hoarder.
I disagree. I think you're mistaking exhibitionism for lack of options. In the 80s, Baumeister was living in suburban Indianapolis houses with small yards and close neighbors. He couldn't keep them. He had to dump them. The display you're talking about was simply the only way to get rid of the evidence without getting caught by his neighbors or his wife. Fox Hollow didn't change his psychology. It unlocked his true desire. The farm allowed him to finally do what he always wanted: keep them. The I-70 dumpings were the compromise. Fox Hollow was the goal.
That assumes a level of long-term planning that the evidence doesn't really support. If he always wanted to keep them, why did the I-70 killer leave so little evidence? Those scenes were clean. Swift strangulation, body dumped, killer gone. It was efficient. Now look at Fox Hollow. It was chaotic. We're talking about commingled remains, thousands of fragments. This wasn't a mastermind finally getting his way. This was a man spiraling into disorganization. The I-70 killer was cold and calculated. Baumeister, by the mid-90s, was a mess.
He was a mess because he was decomposing mentally and functionally. But let's go back to the method of killing, because this is where the link solidifies for me. Strangulation. The I-70 killer strangled his victims. Baumeister strangled his victims. We aren't talking about a shooter or a stabber. We are talking about a hands-on killer. Whether it was a rope in a ditch or a pool hose in a mansion, the mechanism of death, asphyxiation, is the constant.
But the context of that strangulation is radically different. And this brings us to the Brian Smart persona. We have the testimony of Tony Harris, the man who survived Baumeister. And Harris describes a consensual scenario-erotic asphyxiation using a pool hose during an intimate encounter. It was a ritual, a complex staged event involving trust and a slow buildup. Compare that to the I-70 victims. Eric Allen Rochker, found in '85, had a burn mark on his shoulder and was strangled with a rope. Michael Andrew Riley was likely strangled with a towel. These were brute force attacks, likely opportunistic. The I-70 murders look like predatory executions. The Fox Hollow murders look like sexual games that turned fatal, or were designed to be fatal from the start.
Opportunistic doesn't mean simple. The I-70 victims were often driven considerable distances. Michael Sean Petrie was seen in a stranger's car days before he was found. That implies a period of captivity, or at least a long drive. That is intimacy, however twisted. And regarding the tool, the pool hose versus the rope, that is purely environmental. If you're in a car, you use what you have, a rope, a towel. If you're at your home with an indoor pool, you use the hose. The tool serves the environment. The killer adapts. You're asking for the MO to remain static for 15 years? But serial offenders evolve. They learn, they refine.
Or they devolve. And that's what I see with Baumeister. You call it refinement, I call it sloppiness. Let's look at how he got caught. He let Tony Harris leave. He drove his own car, a gray Buick, and let Harris see the license plate. He was practically handing out his business card. Contrast that with the I-70 killer, who was a ghost. No plates, no definitive sightings, just a vague description of a blue van or a red Jeep. The I-70 killer evaded the FBI for a decade. Baumeister got clocked by a club kid in a few months because he was reckless. Are we really saying this is the same criminal mastermind?
The recklessness in the 90s was a symptom of his arrogance. He had gotten away with it for so long, 16 years by my count, that he felt invincible. That sloppiness with Tony Harris wasn't incompetence, it was the hubris of a predator who thought he owned the town. And let's not forget, the I-70 investigation was heating up in '91. He stopped because the heat was on. He moved the party to Fox Hollow because he thought he could control the variables. The fact that he eventually got lazy doesn't negate the decade of discipline that came before. It just shows that absolute power corrupts.
I want to touch on the heat you mentioned. The I-70 killer stopped, yes, but if Baumeister was the I-70 killer, avoiding heat, why did he leave a gap? The I-70 murders stopped in late '91. The first identified Fox Hollow victims, men like Johnny Beyer or Jeffrey Allen Jones, disappear in '93. That's an 18-month silence. If the compulsion is the same, why the vacation? A serial killer driven by a need to strangle doesn't just take a sabbatical for a year and a half.
Life happens. In '91 and '92, Baumeister was expanding the Save-A-Lot business. His wife, Julie, reported that his mood swings were getting worse, the marriage was straining. It's entirely possible that the pressures of life, combined with the close calls of the I-70 investigation, force a dormancy. Or, and this is the darker reality, there are victims from '91 and '92 that we simply haven't identified yet. We have 10,000 bone fragments. We are identifying people 30 years later. To assume the gap is real is to assume we have found everyone, and I don't think we have.
That is speculation, though. We have to debate the evidence we have, not the evidence we might find. And speaking of evidence, let's talk about the end, the suicide. Pinery Provincial Park, Ontario, July 1996. Baumeister knows the police are digging up his yard. He flees. He shoots himself. He leaves a 3-page note.
The final confession.
But it wasn't. That's the point. It was a 3-page letter on yellow legal pad, and it was entirely about, well, mundane failures. He talked about the failing thrift store business. He lamented the divorce. He apologized for messing up the park with his suicide. He mentioned his last meal was a peanut butter sandwich. But he wrote 0 words, 0, about the 11 men in his backyard.
Which is exactly what you would expect from a malignant narcissist.
But if he was this prolific I-70 killer, a man who had terrorized the state for 16 years, why not claim it? Why not go out with the infamy? The silence in that note suggests a level of compartmentalization that is just terrifying. He truly didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a failed businessman.
No, he saw himself as a victim. That's the key to the note. He was feeling sorry for himself. Admitting to the murders, Fox Hollow or I-70, would have shattered the one thing he valued more than human life, his image. He wanted to be remembered as the businessman who had a bad run of luck, not the sexual predator. The fact that he didn't mention the Fox Hollow bodies, which we know were there, proves that his silence means nothing. If he can ignore the bones his kids were finding in the yard, he can certainly ignore the bodies he left in ditches 10 years prior. The omission is an act of image management, not proof of innocence.
I grant you the narcissism, but let's look at the physical descriptions from the I-70 era. We have witnesses in the Delvoyd Lee Baker case who saw a blue van. In the James Boyd Robbins case, witnesses described a red Jeep or a Chevy Blazer. Baumeister drove a gray Buick in the 90s. In the 80s, he had access to company cars, sure, but there is no definitive link to these specific vehicles. We're trying to jam a square peg into a round hole because the timeline is convenient.
Witness testimony on car colors from the 1980s is notoriously unreliable. Nighttime, sodium lights, blue looks black, red looks brown. But you know what isn't unreliable? The face. Look at the composite sketch of the I-70 suspect. White male, average build, distinct bushy mustache. Now look at Herb Baumeister's mugshot from 1986. It is the same man. The physical resemblance is undeniable. And regarding the cars, he was a businessman. He had a fleet for Save-A-Lot. He rented vehicles. A predator who uses his own distinct car every time is a predator who gets caught in week 1. The variation in vehicles actually supports the theory of a calculated killer.
Calculated?
We just established he was sloppy with Tony Harris. You can't have it both ways. You can't say he was a master of disguise in the 80s and then claim his sloppiness in the 90s was just arrogance. I think the simpler explanation is that the I-70 killer was a transient. The interstate profile fits a trucker, someone mobile. Baumeister was local. He was rooted. The I-70 crimes scream mobility. The Fox Hollow crimes scream stagnation.
But the I-70 dump sites, Hamilton County, Preble County, these aren't cross-country dumps. They are local dumps. They are within a 2-hour drive of Indianapolis. A local knows the back roads. A local knows which exits have no cameras. Otto Gary Becker, found in 1991, was in Henry County. That is Baumeister's backyard. The transient theory is the one that lets us sleep at night because it means the killer moves on. The neighbor theory is the reality.
There is one victim that troubles your timeline, though. Jerry Williams Comer. He went missing in August 1995, height of the Fox Hollow era. His car was found at a mall. He fits the profile perfectly, but his remains were never found at Fox Hollow. Authorities linked him to Baumeister, but without the physical remains, it implies that even in the 90s, the MO wasn't absolute. If Baumeister was the I-70 killer, wouldn't we expect to find at least one I-70 victim transferred to the farm? A transitional victim, someone who bridges the gap? We have nothing.
Because the farm wasn't ready yet. The transitional victims are the ones in the gap, the ones we haven't found. Or perhaps the transition was purely mental. He decided no more driving, no more ditches. The lack of physical overlap is exactly what you expect when a killer changes his methodology. But the psychological overlap is the fingerprint. Gay men, strangulation, Indianapolis, the same 4 blocks. If you deny the connection, you are arguing that Herb Baumeister, a man with a history of urophilia and dead animals, just started killing at an expert level in 1993. That doesn't happen. Killers practice. The I-70 murders were his practice run.
Expert level? Again, I point to the chaos of the bone field. That isn't expertise. It's madness. It's a frenzy. But I will concede this. The duality of the man is staggering. He founded a charity thrift store while burying men in his garden. He hosted pool parties for the community while bones were literally surfacing in the woods 100 yards away.
He was a master of bifurcation.
He was, and it creates a very difficult shadow to peer into. But I worry that by pinning I-70 on him, we are closing the book on men like Eric Allen Rotger and Michael Allen Glenn. We are offering their families a likely answer rather than a proven one. The forensic DNA linkage just isn't there. There were other predators in the Midwest. There was Larry Eiler, the highway killer, operating in a similar time frame nearby. It wasn't just Baumeister. The world was dangerous, and until we have that link, skepticism is the only respectful position.
And I worry that by separating them, we underestimate the capacity of the man. We fail to see how a predator adapts to survive. I look at the cessation of I-70 in 91 and the rise of Fox Hollow in 93, and I don't see a coincidence. I see a timeline of terror that simply changed addresses. The Fox Hollow discovery didn't just expose a new killer, it solved the mystery of where the old one went. He went home.
That is a chilling thought. And perhaps you are right. But as I look at the differences, the rope versus the hose, the ditch versus the garden, the display versus the hoarding, I see a chasm that leaves room for another monster in the dark.
Whether it was one monster or two, the devastation they left behind is singular. Families of men like Alan Lee Livingston waited 30 years for a phone call. We are only just now learning the names of the men Baumeister tried to erase.
And families of the I-70 victims are still waiting. That ambiguity is the final cruelty of these crimes.
It is. Thank you for joining the debate.
Thank you.